Thanks for listening to the Farmers Weekly podcast. Do remember you can subscribe to Farmers Weekly magazine and get all the latest news, views and market prices by visiting fwi.co.uk. That is the sound of the UK potato harvest. A huge red giant machine lifting the crop straight out of the ground as it trundles across the field here in Lincolnshire. It's a crop that faces lots of challenges, but also lots of opportunities too. Yes, we're eating fewer potatoes, but exciting new markets are emerging, and so too are new ways of growing them, as we're going to find out. This is the Farmers Weekly podcast. I'm Johann Tasker.
And I'm Louise Impey.
First though, the Farmers Weekly news headlines.
The Farmers Weekly podcast.
The government's seeking a reported £100 million cut to England's farming budget as it tries to plug a £22 billion shortfall in public finances. Defra civil servants are said to have identified unspent funding as money which could be handed back to the Treasury. Farmers Weekly understands Defra is also exploring the idea of making it harder for farmers to sign up to its flagship environmental land management scheme, including the Sustainable Farming Incentive. Farmers Weekly Deputy Editor Abby Kay.
My advice to farmers is apply for ELM now, because this might be as good as it is going to get. So perhaps think about it, take what you can get now. Obviously, any existing offers are going to be honoured. It's really interesting, actually, Johann, that we had George Eustace on the podcast, didn't we, just after the election. We did an election special. And he was saying this would happen, that civil servants would identify the fact that there was an underspend, so Conservatives hadn't ploughed all the money that they'd recouped from BPS cuts into the new environmental land management scheme, and that money would be vulnerable. So it's interesting that that is playing out now in internal discussions. And he also mentioned one of the other things that civil servants will be likely to identify would be TB compensation. Now, the government has just announced that they are going to draw up a new TB strategy. So perhaps one to watch there, are they going to wrap up some changes to TB compensation in that wider TB strategy?
That's Abby Kay, and more on badgers and TB in a moment. But first, the government's granted emergency approval to 3 bluetongue vaccines as cases of the virus continue to rise. The vaccines are available for cattle and sheep in the high-risk counties of Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex, as well as Kent and West Sussex. Bluetongue has now been confirmed on more than 30 farms in eastern England, carried across the North Sea from the continent via midges blown on the wind. Farmers Weekly news editor Phil Clark.
The advice has been all along to remain vigilant, to report cases and suspect cases as they emerge. Initially, the NFU didn't want the vaccine on the grounds that whilst it had been approved in the Netherlands and Belgium as an emergency provision, it hadn't actually proved that effective. I think it can be likened perhaps to the COVID vaccine, where the symptoms can be suppressed, but in terms of actually stopping the spread, it hasn't. It can slow the spread, so that's definitely a good thing. But I think the weather and the climate is probably going to be more impactful in the immediate term.
Phil Clark there with that report. And finally, Defra says it will continue culling badgers to combat bovine tuberculosis while it explores options to vaccinate cattle. Farmers Weekly chief reporter Phil Case.
The cattle vaccination trials are going to continue soon, and this will include fieldwork into an associated Defra test, a diagnostic tool to differentiate between vaccinated and unvaccinated cattle. However, the government has said that it will continue badger culling licences, or the existing badger culling licences will continue until 2026. However, it has said that it plans to end culling by the end of this parliament, so it's clearly left the door open depending on the timescale with cattle vaccine.
And that move has infuriated animal welfare protesters who this week descended on Parliament to lobby MPs against the cull.
There was a fairly large protest this week at Westminster. This was led by the Badger Trust, and there were some notable anti-cull campaigners who were speaking there, including Dominic Dyer and Chris Packham. Their argument is that by allowing badger culling to continue until the end of this Parliament, they say that there could be 50,000 more badgers culled this year and a further 50,000 the following year in 2025. They are calling for an end to culling immediately, and for Labour to fulfil its promise in its manifesto. They also are a bit miffed about why the Labour government is so intent on switching to badger vaccination. They feel it similarly to culling, it will not really be an effective measure and will cost a lot of money. They also would prefer more investment in enhanced testing tools and also biosecurity on farms.
That's Farmers Weekly Chief Reporter Phil Case, and you can catch up with all that news and much, much more in this week's issue of Farmers Weekly, Friday the 6th of September 2024. Now though, the market prices. The finished steer deadweight all average this week is 498.1, up from 496.1 last week. The finished steer live weight, though, is down to 274.2 from 282.2. Into the sheep rings, the lamb's deadweight SQQ is 663.5, down from 665.5. Live weight SQQ also down to 90.5 from 298.1. Onto the arable markets, feed wheat is 175.3, up from 173.8 last week. Milling wheat 231.7, down from 232.9. Feed barley 154.3, up from 147.1. Oilseed rape is 373.9, up from 372.6. Feed peas are worth 250.5, and feed beans are worth 214.3. And our Wednesday morning ring round puts red diesel at 64.8 pence per litre, down from 66.3 pence last week. That's your markets for now.
At Avent, we create solutions to improve your livestock farming. Our compact loaders handle daily demands with ease. From feeding and bedding to cleaning and maintenance. With powerful hydraulics, a compact design, and a quick attach system, you can switch attachments quickly, navigating narrow barns and tight pens effortlessly. Our durable and reliable machines save you time and effort. Join countless livestock farmers who trust Avent to keep their operations running smoothly. Avent, your trusted partner in livestock farming. Search for Avent now.
Welcome back to the Farmers Weekly podcast, coming to you from Potato Days UK, two-day industry extravaganza here at Dyson Farming in Lincolnshire. We've got growers, processors, retailers all with us, and Louise, we've even got potato harvesting taking place right next to us as we speak.
Yeah, we've got the whole supply chain here, haven't we? And it's really good to see it, actually. I think it's obviously a very well-attended event. Having the live machinery demonstrations, you can see the pull that they have had. Lots of people are looking at the machines, and aren't they enormous, some of those machines? It has been obviously a very, exceptionally prolonged planting year earlier this year. So there have been some decisions that have had to be made. It's very clear that when you're here, whether you've got the processors, the packers, the agronomy companies, the growers, it's a small sector now, it's a specialist sector, and they're pulling together now and hoping to get the right results.
The thing I like about specialist sectors is that they're close-knit. Each part of the supply chain really does rely on the next to be profitable, to be successful. So while growing potatoes is an expensive business, there's a lot of camaraderie within that supply chain.
Oh yes, there's huge capital investment if you're a potato grower, so you really do have to have good relationships and a good understanding with the people that you're dealing with. I think we're seeing that here today, and I'm really looking forward to having a good look around.
What are you looking forward to seeing in particular?
Well, I'm always interested in the agronomy side, but that's just...
the way that you're built.
If you say so. That's my comfort zone, I suppose. But, of course, there's much more than that here. So it's a really good opportunity to get up to date with some of the research and development work that's going on, to understand a bit more about what the supply chain is wanting from growers. That's changed significantly in the last few years. So it's really key to understand what's behind that and how that's all being driven. And of course, if you're a machinery buff, then there is potato machinery here to die for.
And before we do have a look around, Louise, we've got Andy Cunningham with us from Syngenta to give us an update on this year's potato crop. Andy, this year's crop, where are we?
Well, my impression is that the industry is in a relatively decent place, given where I thought we might be this time after the season of 22, which was very warm, very hot, and did compromise the quality of the seed. Turns out the resilience of the growers is definitely there. Unfortunately, although we don't have any significantly official figures around planting areas, it looks like the planting area of potatoes is being maintained, which is really good for the industry and hopefully for the growers as well.
So it's there or thereabouts then in terms of, 100,000 hectares, something like that?
Yeah, there's nothing dead set on exactly what number it is, but it does seem to be around that figure, yeah.
Here we are at Nocton, just outside Lincoln, a day that, to be honest, has been typical of this summer. There's a bit of drizzle, so it's a little bit wet. It's not too warm, it's cool, so it's cool and wet. That brings its own challenges with potatoes.
It definitely does. We saw it at the beginning part of the year, very wet, and we struggled to get the crop in the ground in the first set. When we did get them in, the season, although, as you said, it's been quite cool, quite wet, it has been relatively kind for the crops to grow. But what that does bring with it is a lot of blight pressure. Probably one of the biggest topics I get brought up about is the blight strains that's happening in Europe. The good thing is, looking at the results from the fight against blight, them strains have not turned up in the UK at this moment in time, which means them chemistries are still very effective against all the strains that we can control late blight with. Now, in the UK, we do have very good practices, which I think is one of the factors as to why these blight strains haven't turned up. The mixing and alternating that our growers implement means that any resistant strains, any problematic strains don't able to get a foothold in our crops.
So that's blight. What about pests this season?
Blight is always one of the biggest topics. The second topic is soil pests. Nemathorin is obviously one of the biggest products regards to PCN, potato cyst nematode. Massive problem around the UK. I think varieties are becoming more and more of an important factor in this. There appears to be some really good resistant varieties in the use, and variety resistance is great, and I think that is one of the key IPM measures that you can implement to keep PCN levels down, but it's part of the whole toolbox. So varieties, rotation, good soil hygiene, but also use of seed pre-products like nemathorin will enable that these soil pests that are so problematic, not only to yield but also quality. We think about wireworm, that's an increasing problem. We're hoping to bring a product called Force Evo or teflurethrin-based granule, hopefully for the 25 season as well, so that should also be available for the growers to utilise to keep these soil pests down to a minimum and ensure that the yields and quality is achieved at the end of the season.
So a number of challenges facing growers and the sector, but growers still growing potatoes.
That's a really big positive, and I turned up today and I was really positively and pleasantly surprised just the numbers of people here. People still want to grow potatoes, and quite rightly so. It's a very important crop to us as an industry, and also to the consumers at home as well. So it's really positive, really happy, and it's good to see so many people here.
Anything in particular you're looking forward to seeing today?
Just a wide range of topics that can be discussed today, whether that's getting the crop in the ground, getting out the ground, protecting the crop whilst it's there, fertilisers, pretty much every topic you can think about.
Well, let's hope the rain holds off and go and have a look around. Andy, thank you very much.
No, thanks very much.
Have
a good day.
So, Louise, an update there from Andy. You see a lot of potato growers on your travels. It has been a challenging year, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely it has. And, at this time of year now, it's being a bit more complicated coming into harvest because we had a very protracted, prolonged planting season. So some decisions to be made this year that they won't have had to have made last year.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Now, we've heard already about the challenges facing potato growers, and those challenges include the need to reduce inputs, not just to reduce input costs, but to make potatoes a more environmentally friendly crop. It's a big focus here at Potato Days UK, and we're here in the experimental crop plots with 3 scientists who are working to do just that. 3 plots, all growing potatoes, cutting-edge research going on, and one of them is yours, Catherine Steele of Bangor University. The middle plot here, you're breeding new varieties that require fewer inputs.
That's correct, yes. We've got new varieties of potatoes. All of them have been developed from crosses between a Sharpo variety that has its own late blight resistance genes and other late blight resistant varieties. And these have been grown in our field in North Wales under blight conditions with no fungicide whatsoever in trials since 2018. Every year we've selected which ones stood up best to the blight. And we've been testing them for other traits as well, but late blight resistance has been the number one focus. And from that, we've got these 6 varieties that clones that we consider as the most promising. So we thought we'd give them a go here in Lincolnshire to see how they get on in a different environment. And this is the first time they've actually had a blight fungicide programme as well. So it's just been very interesting to see how they're performing here. And we're actually really pleased with the results, and it's been fantastic to come to this event today.
So what sort of results are you seeing here in Lincolnshire?
Most of them are standing up to the different environment and producing potatoes that are very similar to what we were expecting. So the characteristics are surprisingly uniform between North Wales in the stony soil and here in this beautiful fen soil. But one of them, which we thought maybe was knobbly because it was growing around stones in Wales, it's actually got knobbles, it's a bit unsightly shape, and it's still getting that in this soil here. So it's not the soil, it's the variety. So maybe that one is not one that anybody would want to buy in a supermarket, unfortunately.
So we can hear the commentary continuing from the harvesting demonstration. Christine Jones from Dyson Farming Research, you're hosting these trial plots. It's important for you to be involved in this research.
Yes, we're interested in any research in potatoes, both for our clients as Dyson Farming Research and for our own farm here as Dyson Farming. We're looking at the moment at various ways of reducing inputs into potatoes. So we're delighted to be part of this project with Catherine and other collaborators, looking at different ways of achieving that. The plot that we've got here has got some examples of some of our research, looking at different cultivation techniques, looking at soil-applied microbes, and also looking at possible ways of introducing or encouraging beneficial insects to come into the crop, and seeing whether we can get the same effects with chemical attractants, which might be more practical for a farmer to use.
And there's something that I can see here in as much as there are rows of potatoes, but in between the rows there are some flowers, some heathers, and hoverfly attractants, are they?
Yes, the plants we've got here are examples of things that might attract hoverflies. In our fields here at Nocton, we use floral tramlines, but it can be a challenge getting them established early in the season to get the flowers at the time we particularly want the hoverflies to come into the field. So this is where the chemical attractants may be more practical, because early in the season, when there's the biggest risk of virus transmission by the aphids, the flowers might not have developed by that time.
We said that this was cutting-edge research. This is the TRIP project, the Transformative Reduced Input Potatoes project. Richard Peen from Light Science Technologies. Yes. You're involved in this as well, and you're looking at nitrous oxide emissions and sensors.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. Yes, we're working alongside with Christine from Dyson Farming Research with their trial plots with various different trial protocols, different nitrogen levels. We're looking to sit on different soil levels, different soil types as well. We're looking to see what sort of effect the emissions are coming off those trials.
Ultimately, I guess this is going to enable growers to apply the fertiliser required in the right amounts and at the right time of the season.
Exactly, yes. It's to basically create an intuitive tool for them that will give them an indication of what's going on in the soil with regards to nutrient level and also consequential emissions levels when bacteria activity is quite high, and ultimately reduce their inputs. If they don't need to put the fertiliser on, then hopefully that will work for them.
And that'll translate straight to the bottom line, I guess.
Absolutely. That is the aim of the game, because it's never going to get any cheaper to keep producing food that we desperately need, isn't it?
Louise, this is really, really important, this kind of research, because margins are tight in the potato sector. It's an increasingly competitive arena, and the crop has to be profitable for growers to grow it.
Absolutely, it does. And of course, reducing inputs is a theme that we hear, not just in potatoes, but across the whole of the arable farming sector. We've got a lot of the processors here and the food companies. Obviously, they are very keen that growers are using fewer inputs and, if you like, producing more sustainable crops. So all of this sort of work is terribly important. We need as much of this as possible. It's really good that they've got so many people involved in this project, including various farming groups as well. And hopefully, this is 2 years in now, there's another year to go. So hopefully there'll be some really good practical take-home techniques and approaches that potato growers can put in place.
So Christine Jones from Dyson Farming Research, is this research here, is it about a step change or is it about marginal gains?
I think it's lots of little steps put together which will make a bigger change. So some things may be practical for one farmer and not another farmer, but we're hoping that from the project as a whole there'll be things that different farmers can take up to help them reduce their inputs, have more sustainable farming on their own individual farms, including ours here at Dyson.
And Richard Peen from Light Science Technologies, why is it important for you to be involved in this sort of research?
Ultimately, we still want to produce affordable crops, but at the same time try and do as much benefit to the environment as well. And projects like this, which enable us to start to get some sort of insight what is going on in the actual ground itself, the byproduct of that, and hopefully vindicate a lot of unjust claims that are laid on farmers as being the creators of a lot of toxins and emissions in this world. I think a lot of it is unfounded, but unless we crack on and keep chipping away at work, cutting edge work, it is genuinely cutting edge work. Like Christine says, yes, it is little baby steps at a time, but that will make up the whole, and hopefully we'll be getting there.
Christine Jones from Dyson Farming Research, Catherine Steele from Bangor University and Richard Peen from Light Science Technologies. The Transformative Reduced Input Potatoes Project, the TRIP project, thank you very much.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
The need to ensure potatoes are profitable while reducing chemical usage and emissions is seeing more farmers consider natural alternatives when it comes to crop inputs. Biopesticides, bionutrients, biostimulants, all natural products, and in emerging markets of increasing interest to potato growers and indeed exhibitors here at Potato Days UK. But like any new market, it can be difficult to decide which products work best and indeed whether they work at all, especially when it comes to increasing yields. Andrew Francis of Home Farm Nacton near Ipswich in Suffolk.
What's interesting is seeing the amount of investment that is going into these products. A lot of the traditional crop protection companies are now all have some kind of biological interest, whether they've absorbed additional companies or starting up their own, and I think that tells us where the trend is likely to go. So they wouldn't be doing that if there wasn't a future in it. What we really need is someone to sort of distill it all down for us as farmers. So there's a huge amount of of products available. There's lots coming forward all of the time. But what we really need is consistent data to demonstrate need. Now, from what I fully understand, that those particular products are inconsistent by their nature, because you're utilising something that's more biological rather than synthesised. So therefore the output can be variable. And I think if you're going to think about going into looking at these types of products, you've got to be of a mind that you've got to look over a number of years. You've got to expect variability, but you've got to look at really sort of trend responses rather than single year responses.
And are you using any yourself?
Yeah, so we're using some on other crops. On the potatoes, for next year, 2025, we will be starting to look at some of the biological solutions, certainly from a foliar perspective, because I think that technology is quite easy to transfer from other crops into the potato. I think there are certain things in terms of sort of soil interventions and how we're managing our soil environment that and the soil health, the fungal and biological populations. I think that's a really interesting space for us to get into, just literally, because there is such a sheer root mass of potatoes under the soil. So if we can influence that by 10%, that's going to be really, really significant. But at the moment, I think, we're right at the very early stages of that, and those kind of works are only just developing.
That's Andrew Francis from Home Farm Nacton. So what about the companies behind some of these biological products, and what exactly do they do? Simon Fox is founder and chief executive of Emerald Research, and Simon says his holistic approach to crop nutrition, known as OptiYield, can increase potato performance while reducing fertiliser use.
We employ bacterial mixtures of our own devising and biostimulants integrated in with a soil and foliar applied approach. And what we've done in these trials here is demonstrate that by using bacteria in the soil to encourage crop vigour and initial growth, we've managed to do without soil applied fungicides, and then using foliar nutrition approach as opposed to soil fertiliser approach, we've grown a crop equivalent to 55 tonnes a hectare using only 30 kilograms of nitrogen and only 12 kilograms of phosphate per hectare.
So you're using fewer inputs but getting a greater yield? Some people say that. How can that work?
Yeah, well, I know it doesn't sound entirely logical, but the reason is because we're using an integrated and holistic approach as opposed to a product-based approach, and we're essentially trying to build soil health. Soil health using the bacteria improves crop vigour, better rooting, better tuber initiation, greater disease resistance. We get a happier, healthier plant. Using foliar nutrients, particularly things like foliar phosphate, where we've got nearly, certainly above 90% uptake and absorption applied at specific periods of growth, means that not only do you get considerably more uptake than you would from soil. Soil applied phosphate is probably 8 to 10% efficient. Not only that, you cannot tell when it's going to take it up. If you get a dry period or a wet period, it may not be taking it up when it needs it. By a foliar approach, you know that it's almost a surgical approach, because you're applying exactly what the crop needs in exactly the amount it needs on the day it needs it. And the same is true for nitrogen as well, where we're getting, again, approaching 100% uptake and absorption. And we found this worked particularly well in droughty periods, not this year obviously, but in previous years where we've had periods of drought. The combined foliar approach with the biostimulants, with the bacteria, and I do emphasise that integrated approach, has provided yields in excess of 75 tonnes per hectare in a drought period without irrigation for main crop potatoes. And that is just the way the facts seem to come out. And our customers would attest to that, because they keep coming back year on year and indeed growing in number, adopting our system.
Simon Fox from Emerald Research. So what should potato growers do when trying to reach a decision? Independent potato consultant Mark Stallen.
So the key question I ask of anybody coming to me now as an independent or in my former life as a researcher was, show me a mode of action, whether it's in a test tube or in a glass house or even out in the field. Then you've got a hypothesis to say this is the mode of action. So we can either look at two particular pathways. We need to capture light to produce carbohydrate to produce the yield in potatoes. We can either do that by changing the efficiency with which we convert light into carbohydrate, or we can just capture more radiation. And in general, if we can't capture more radiation, nearly all of the work that we've showed is we're not going to get a change in yield. So that leaves this thing about changing efficiency, and it's really difficult to change efficiency by an amount that has a material effect. And a lot of these products are claiming these changes with either very little data or with data that really doesn't stand up to a lot of scientific rigour. And when we're faced with that, the world is awash now with products. Many of these products actually are coming out of various industries. They're very expensive to produce, and therefore they may not be suitable for growing on extensive crops. Many of them are actually waste byproducts and have been used for many years, like seaweed extracts, simple sugars and so on being put on. I think growers need to be aware that some of these products are actually just being rebadged from 20 years ago, so they're seeing the same products. So don't be believing material that you tested years ago is no different, but there will be new products and new avenues going on. It's a very difficult area as a scientist to understand. It's a very difficult area as a grower to know what's out there. So many people are testing it. There are independent people like McCain's and PepsiCo testing themselves because they want to understand what to recommend for their growers. And that's really where you should be looking, is to look for independent bodies of data, which are not just one trial, they're multiple trials and also multiple products as well.
Is it too much to say whether it's science or snake oil?
Long pause. There are products out there that are definitely silver bullet type. People are clutching at those. There are snake oil dealers. There are snake oil products. Almost certainly snake oil has been used on some part of crop somewhere in the world. But there is science as well. The key is just unravelling all that in a market that just seems to be full of players now.
That's independent potato consultant Mark Stallam. There you go, Louise. Some interesting and different views on biostimulants. Do you think they have a place in potatoes?
Well, I'm sure that they do. It's not dissimilar to other crops, the situation that we've got here at the moment with potatoes. We need some really good, independent evidence that shows, A, what they do and whether they do it consistently, and B, how they should be used to get those effects, if indeed that is possible. Now, it covers a whole range of products, that term. There's a plethora of things out there. So we do probably need to sort them out a bit. And again, that's no different in potatoes as it is in other crops. We are losing active ingredients, and probably the potato sector's been harder hit than the others on that. We have got this public pressure. They want us to use fewer pesticides. They like the idea of a biological product, and as I said, they come in various forms, these things. So I expect that they have a place. The real answer is we don't really know yet. So let's hope that lots of R&D work gets done, and let's hope the situation becomes clearer.
It was interesting that Andrew Francis from Home Farm Nacton's looking at biological solutions. Simon Fox, Chief Executive of Emerald Research, obviously says they do work, and he says he's got growers that are using them, and not only using them but coming back to use them again. Mark Stallam, independent potato consultant, I wouldn't say cynical but sceptical as to whether they work.
Yes, and I expect that they're all right. I think, we know one of the issues has been we haven't been able to see the same results in consecutive years. We know, this season's been particularly challenging. There have been a lot of pressures on the crops and on growers. Would those products have worked the same this year? We don't know that yet, as they would have done last year. Again, these are things that really do need to be teased out. We've had an exceptionally wet year, of course, this year. Next year might be exceptionally dry. So how do these products work under those different environmental constraints, if you like. What do they cost? I don't know if we've really touched on that much today, but of course growers aren't really looking just to replace one cost with another. We are trying to reduce the number of interventions we use in crops. So there are still a lot of questions, but it's a growing and emerging market. There's a lot of interest in these things, so we look forward to seeing some really solid evidence.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Now, Potato Days UK wouldn't be what it is without three big players in the UK potato sector. Host farm Dyson Farming, potato growers, packers and processors Branston Limited, and multinational frozen food company McCain Foods. All of them here today. Daniel Cross from Dyson Farming, a fantastic turnout. Why is it important for Dyson to be involved in an event like this?
Potatoes are a really important crop for us, but also with Dyson Farming Research, we're doing a lot of work in potatoes amongst our other crops, and so great to host this many people and be able to bring them to our farm. I think particularly this event where you've got live demonstrations and you can really get involved in things. It's just a great opportunity to connect and find collaborators for what we're trying to achieve in food in the UK.
We've seen a lot today about the challenges facing the sector, how the sector is trying to meet those challenges, in particular carbon footprint, net zero, reducing the environmental impact of potato production. That's something that is important to you as well.
Yeah, really important, and we've got a lot of research specifically going into potatoes as well as more broadly into other crops as well. So, a lower carbon, lower emission food, particularly British food, that we can supply to people with short supply chains here in the UK. That's what we're really wanting to achieve.
And we've heard today in the net zero session about things like low carbon fertilisers, low nitrogen varieties. Are these all things that you're trying out on this farm?
Lower input potatoes is something that's very important for us and something we're researching. So there's a whole list of 20 or 30 different things that we're working through to do that, but it's all under the banner of low input potatoes and doing something different.
So that includes not just the growing of the potatoes, but the storage of them as well?
Yeah, potato storage, cold storage uses a lot of energy, so relatively straightforward in converting that to renewables. We've got big shed spaces, so we have solar panels, but we also have 2 anaerobic digesters, so we're producing more electricity than we use anyway across our total business, and so that's relatively straightforward for us.
Do you have a figure on the carbon footprint of the potatoes that are being grown here, or what progress you might have made with that?
Not that we're going to talk about, no.
But reducing that carbon footprint is important. As Dyson Farms, you've got a number of different enterprises from broadacre arable crops through to glasshouse strawberries. What's your overall farming philosophy when it comes to food production and the environment?
We believe in food production in harmony with the environment, and whether that's biodiversity and how we manage pollinating insects and those kind of things in and around our fields, or the same, our glasshouse crops, they're low input crops. That is our farming philosophy. How do we do as much as possible with as little as possible? And in most cases, as little as possible means there is an environmental benefit. And so producing that food in harmony with the environment, but also producing it here in the UK rather than importing it, so you've got shorter supply chains and shorter supply chain carbon footprints. That's what we're trying to do. We want to feed people here.
So we're also joined by Mark Wilcox from potato grower, packer and processor Branston. Mark, what's Branston doing to reduce the carbon footprint of potatoes?
We like to think quite a lot, of course, but of course you can always do more. We've been working on an Innovate UK funded project now for 2 years. It's got another 18 months to go, along with agri-tech company Beehive, Lincoln University, a couple of other potato growers, and a company called Crop Systems that design cold stores, to see just how far down the road towards net zero potatoes we can get. Obviously root crops are considered a problem crop for all the reasons that people understand, but we think there are some really good opportunities.
Low nitrogen varieties, where are we with those? I believe you can halve the amount of nitrogen you use on those.
Well, certainly a number of varieties that need about half of the nitrogen fertiliser compared to traditional varieties. Of course, deciding how much N to apply for a grower at the start of the season is a really tricky operation and is not straightforward. But there are certainly some that routinely seem to give us the same quality and yield at around half of the N. Now, what we've got to do is make sure that they can grow properly every year and that they, of course, they eat to the same standard, and that is sometimes the challenge if we're honest.
And low carbon fertiliser is another one, and I know we've talked about these before on the podcast, but you've had a particular one, I think, in trial for 6 years, so you must be seeing some progress there.
Yeah, we're really excited about this particular one. It bakes in some CO2 as part of the manufacturing process. It's been validated and verified by an external body, and as part of this grant process, we've done the same thing on the usage stage of that product as well. So we're currently looking at a minus 70% CO2e carbon cost, if you like, compared to the mineral alternative. Nutrient uptake at all stages of the growth cycle is at least as good as the mineral alternative, and yield and quality every time has been whatever the field has delivered. So really quite exciting.
One of the other things I think you've been quite excited about is low energy cold storage. What's been happening with that?
Well, as I think you know, we've got growers with cold stores in Scotland, growers with cold stores in the West Country, as far southeast as Kent, and in the classic potato growing country of Lincolnshire, as well as our own cold stores. And there's huge variability. So there isn't really such thing as an average cold store. What we've been able to demonstrate is that by innovating around just a few key things, we think we can get the like-for-like electricity use for the same temperature and for the same quality, if you like, at the end of the storage window, a 30% saving on like-for-like electricity. And then when you overlay solar on top of that, which is not an innovation, it's just good practice these days, that number pushes north of 50% in terms of the opportunity.
So it sounds as though it's really quite possible to reduce the carbon footprint of potato production.
Yeah, I mean, we're not promising net zero yet, but when you take the 82 kilos of CO2e per tonne of packed product that we're challenged with, then if you take the low carbon fertiliser, that has been proven to be around 30 of that 82. Then you add the drop-in fuels, for example, that we haven't talked about, the readily available sort of gas to liquid type products that don't require a tractor change. That's another 4.5 kilos. And then you go all the way through to the cold stores by reducing your electricity. That's another 7.5. So when you add that up, just by doing 3 very practical things that most growers could do, we're over halfway there. So it's not a disaster, but the difficult hard yards are probably yet to come.
Now, also working to reduce their carbon footprint is McCain Foods, and with us is James Young, McCain's Vice President for Agriculture. James, you source about 700,000 tonnes of potatoes annually from UK farms. Sustainability is a big thing for you and indeed your retail customers, and you're working with the rest of the supply chain to achieve it.
Oh, it's a huge thing for us at the moment. It has been since we set our sustainability targets. Within that, our ambition for sourcing all of our potatoes from farms practicing regenerative agriculture by 2030. So it's a huge piece of work for us. And yeah, it's a big part of today as well, which is another benefit for being here with the rest of the industry, because you can't make changes like that just all by ourselves. This is about collaboration, other buyers of potatoes, machinery manufacturers, as you'll have seen here today, but critically, of course, about growers and farmers. And it's great to see a lot of them here today and having that discussion, like you say, about how to do things differently. Potatoes generally are seen as a very intensive crop, lots of cultivation, but that doesn't mean we should just do nothing. So, we're all trying our best and trying to improve those practices, and it's great to get in those discussions with growers today.
And what progress has been made? I think you have talked about inroads. Where are we at, and how long is it going to take?
Yeah, so we are, and I'm pleased we are making some progress. And I remember we spoke at Groundswell, didn't we, a year and a half ago, and I was describing then that as McCain, as a global business, we've set out our regenerative agriculture framework, identifying different practices that we believe contribute to calling it regenerative agriculture about growing potatoes. And we are making progress through those, whether it's the increased use of cover crops, there's a change in the amount of pesticides that's being used, the species diversity and the biodiversity around potato fields as well, and within potato fields. We're making progress in all those areas, and that's getting measured through the surveys that we do with our growers every year as well.
And it has been a particularly challenging year this year. Is that going to affect the rate of progress?
It'll change the progress, I think, just by having different parameters, different elements of what we describe as regenerative agriculture. I know people have lots of different definitions, but we leave it flexible enough that growers in one season might not be able to do one thing, but they can do another. In the following season, it might be something different. So, yeah, it makes it a little bit different. And, yeah, it's challenging, but we're getting used to that now every year. When isn't there a challenging year? So it's about overcoming those challenges in the best way that we possibly can. And I think, we have to do it. That's, we can't just sit still. And I want potatoes and root veg generally to be part of this discussion about regenerative agriculture. It is hard in a root crop, but we can't sit still and do nothing, and we have to keep moving forward.
So this is about carrots rather than sticks. How are you helping growers with this challenge?
Yeah, it definitely is about carrots. If we just went in there with a stick, then I would get a pretty short response from most of our growers. So, and they want to do these things as well. So they're asking us for help and support. So there are a number of different things. We were talking earlier about our digital tools that are helping with some of the data capture and some of the benchmarking and best practice that comes with that. But there's other things as well, like the trials that I mentioned. There's some different financing models that we've put in there as well to help this process and help growers make the right choices when it comes to new machinery or new practices as well.
So when you talk about practices, shifting less soil?
Yeah, and that's obviously a big target area for us with the amount of cultivation that traditionally has gone on with growing potatoes. But there's things we can do. There's less cultivation we can do. Not on every soil type. This is variable by farm and by different soil type. But you'll have seen around the event today, some of the manufacturers are bringing new equipment to market now. Planting's a great example. The technology that's out there now, again, on some soil, but I've seen where we can go through with much reduced passes to still plant potatoes in a similar way to how we did in the past. So, it's just about this new thinking and trying these new ideas. And it's, again, as I say, great to see the industry here today coming together with these new ideas.
James Young from McCain, Daniel Cross from Dyson Farming, and Mark Wilcox from Branston. Thank you for taking the time to talk to the Farmers Weekly podcast here today. Louise, 3 people, 3 companies, all working to reduce their environmental impact.
Yeah, well, they've all got their independent businesses to each other, aren't they? So although they all work together in a supply chain, they have, of course, got their own business objectives to achieve as well.
Dyson Farming, of course, a big farming company trying to do the right thing, a little reluctant perhaps, understandably. Daniel Cross not wanting to put numbers on the carbon footprint question.
Well, I guess that's maybe commercially sensitive information, so he wasn't going to reveal that to us here today, here and now. But obviously, there's an awful lot of work they're doing here on carbon footprint in all of their crops and in all of their enterprises. So it's something that, every farm's being tasked with now. You have to bring lots of little things together, as we've discovered today when it comes to potatoes, to try and get these improvements. We know what the big culprits are with carbon footprints, with crops like potatoes, and obviously nitrogen fertilisers right up there, as is fuel use. So, we are aware of what they are, and I think you have to chip away at all of them to try and make a real impression.
And some interesting stuff from Mark Wilcox at Branston too. A big potato grower, a big packer and processor, and a big local employer here too in Lincolnshire.
Oh, really interesting stuff. He was able to divide out the carbon footprint of actually growing and storing potatoes from the supply chain bit that Branston does with all their trucks moving around and what the carbon cost of that is as well.
The other interesting thing for me was the approach taken by McCain when it comes to potatoes. Still very much a family-owned business, even though it is a huge player.
Yes, they're a huge player, but they are, as you said, a family-owned business, and they do still really support the family farms. So that's good news. They're very keen to work with growers. They've got various initiatives on the go, whether it's knowledge sharing, knowledge exchange, finance schemes, R&D. They are absolutely dedicated to the potato crop. They need good growers of the crop here in this country, which is excellent to hear. They're not into importing lots of potatoes. That's fantastic. So it's a good symbiotic relationship. They're working nicely with growers. There's nobody forcing anybody to do anything there.
And some good chips as well on their stand, or fries, as our American listeners will know them.
Yes, they were good, weren't they? It's been really rather cold up here today, so they were very welcome.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Well, so far we've spoken about potatoes very much from a UK perspective. This is, of course, Potato Days UK. But potatoes as a crop are much bigger than that, an internationally traded commodity. And to discuss what that means, we have with us Cedric Porter, editor of the global information service World Potato Markets. Cedric, state of the world market for potatoes?
Globally, the market is growing, and it's a good alternative to crops like rice. China and India trying to grow more potatoes as an alternative to rice. UK, we had our smallest crop ever last year. We're going to have another small crop again this year, I think. The area is down 100,000 hectares. At one point, we were growing almost double that. Around about 4.5 million tonnes of potatoes probably going to be grown in the UK this year. In the past, we've done up to about 7 million tonnes in the UK, and we're importing an awful lot more potatoes as well to sort of compensate for that. Around about 1.5 million tonnes of potato equivalent just as frozen chips, worth £1.25 billion. So that's a lot of money that's being leaching out to other parts of the world, mainly Belgium and Holland. There is that sort of potential there. We still eat a lot of potatoes in the UK. It still competes very well with alternatives like rice and pasta. Of course, they've become more popular, and there's new ways of eating, and there's new dishes and things like that. Potatoes really have to sort of fight their corner in that.
So Brits are still eating meat and 2 veg. You mentioned pasta, you mentioned rice. There is that competition within the sector when it comes to things like retail and service sector as well.
Yeah, no, it's a very very competitive market for all foods, and British food has to fight for its bit on the plate with any type of food, particularly so with potatoes. People are eating potatoes, and of course there's a whole variety. Everyone loves potatoes in some way, from chips to crisps to mash to roasties. Everyone loves a roastie. So they still a very, very important part of the plate, and I think also we need to push some of the nutritional value of potatoes in terms of a part of a balanced diet.
We talk about a balanced diet, a traditional diet in Britain. There's also a lot of innovation going on in the sector.
Yeah, no, certainly a lot of innovation, and it's exciting. And some of that is in those alternative uses for potatoes, protein, and some of the alternative non-food uses as well are really important in terms of plastics. I always say I used to get my chips wrapped in newspaper. Now my newspaper comes wrapped in potato plastic. So, there's a lot of that sort of innovation taking place, and UK is really at the forefront of that, and that's great to see. So, getting behind the British potato industry and getting some real sort of enthusiasm is really important, and we can still hold our own in the global world of spuds.
And as if by magic, we've got 2 people here at the cutting edge of innovation. And one of them is V. Guruvajan of Beehive Innovations.
So at Beehive Innovations, we conduct research and development on multiple crops, potatoes being one of the key crops that we look at. For example, we are looking at gene editing potatoes, and we are really ahead of other countries in terms of adoption of Precision Breeding Act. What that allows us to do is to use the gene editing technology to reduce disease and defects and reduce the breeding cycle. Therefore, we can bring better traits, better consumer traits, better agronomy traits, potatoes to the consumers quicker. And we are also bringing military technology. So what we had is an inspiration from military technology, ground penetrating radar, which is being used for IED bomb detection. We have adapted that for agriculture, especially for understanding how much of potatoes are growing underground without digging all of them, to provide a better forecasting tool for the potato farmers.
Also with us, David Pryor-Hope. David, you're making use of something that most growers just see as waste, potato home.
Yes, so essentially I'm from Fibe, I'm the co-founder and CTO. We're making sustainable textile fibres out of byproducts of the potato growth, so that being the potato stem. The goal for us really is to be able to provide growers and the fashion brands an additional way of meeting their sustainability targets and also a way of making the harvest a little bit more profitable.
So we can see at your display, you've got, it looks essentially like a bale of potato home. You're using that to make fibre or turning that fibre into textile.
Exactly. So essentially our process takes this stem and it is able to convert that into sustainable textile fibres, which can be retrofitted into existing textile mills that are typically used for cotton to make yarns and then garments for the fashion industry.
And you've got some customers already?
Well, we are still a little bit in the early days of what we're up to. One of the big achievements for us is we actually closed our pre-seed investment round, so we are still a little bit early. That was actually led by Patagonia, led by their corporate VC, Tinshed Ventures, which is a huge proof of traction. We are getting increasing interest, so we're constantly getting brands coming to our lab in London. And one of them, we're actually quite far in a commercial agreement, negotiations for that. So that's also very, very exciting. So getting a lot of traction on the fashion front, and now on the kind of agricultural front, we're getting more and more momentum. We work very closely with NIAB. We're also working closely with Grimray as well to help us build out the technology for this. But yeah, that's a little bit about what we do.
So people are not only going to be eating potatoes, they're going to be wearing potatoes as well, almost.
Yes, that's the goal for us. Wonderful crop. You can do anything with it.
Well, David V, thank you very much. Cedric, some real hope for the future then.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic to hear those and to see that the UK is really at the forefront of it. Just makes me think that actually, do we need anything else apart from potatoes? Potatoes and water, that's all you need. You can clothe yourself, you can feed yourself, you can put your plastics on. You know, it's that sort of super crop that the world can't do without our potatoes.
So Cedric, V and David, thank you very much. An overview of where we are at the moment and a look into the future. Louise, you can eat potatoes. We've learnt today that we'll soon all be wearing potatoes, or at least fabric made from potato home as well.
Yeah, so there you go. We'll look forward to that, won't we?
And how have you found today?
I found it a really good day, actually. I think they've put on a very, very good event here. You really have been able to catch up with everything that's going on in the potato industry. I think all the main players are here. It's a really good site. It's very accessible. The working demonstrations have been fantastic. And as somebody pointed out to us a bit earlier, the health and safety surrounding those is absolutely spot on, and that's really important with great big kit like that. So all in all, I think anybody who's been here today to pick up information or knowledge, they definitely will have succeeded in that aim.
Well, that's it for this episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast from Potato Days UK, the 2-day event here at Dyson Farming in Lincolnshire. If you like what you've heard, please do subscribe to the Farmers Weekly podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really like what you've heard, do leave us a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast. But for now, thank you for listening. I'm Johann Tasker. Goodbye.
And I'm Louise Impey. Goodbye.